Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have our Sea Grant Marine Mammal webinar. Sarah is the research director at Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network. She has nearly 20 years of experience studying dolphins, whales, including 6 species across 7 countries. The focus of much of her work is on the effects of human activity of coastal dolphin behavior and movement patterns, and she is broadly interested in behavioral ecology, stranding trends, and how human activity affects marine mammals. So with that, Sarah, if you could join us and share your screen.
Thank you, Danny. Yeah, thank you for the introduction and for hosting this webinar overall. I think it's a great way to get the latest information. I've been asked today to talk about the Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network and the role that we fulfill during oil spill response, the importance of stranding programs and PhotoID work for providing both baseline data prior to disaster events and also reference data for comparison to affected areas. So we'll learn more about the overall impacts on marine mammals from the Deepwater Horizon oil spills from Ryan and Sylvain. But I'll start by basically sharing the role that we as a stranding network take when an oil spill incident occurs. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, I know we've probably worked hand in hand with many of you, but for those of you who are not familiar with us, I'll give just a brief introduction here of who we are and what we do. We were established in 1980, primarily to further the understanding and conservation of marine mammals. And this was really coming off the cusp of the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972, during a time when there was an increased interest in studying the animals that were stranding in the US along the coast. We're a nonprofit, 501c3, so fully independent nonprofit, which basically means we're supported by competitive grants and donations. And because marine mammals are federally protected under the MMPA, all of the work that we do is done under a formal stranding agreement with the National Marine Fisheries Service in order to respond to both live and dead stranded animals. So we work under that agreement to do the work that we do. The number of stranding networks in each state, of course, varies. But in Texas, the TMMSN, Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network, is the sole stranding agreement holder for the entire state. And we work with other organizations, given such a large coastline. And several of those organizations are designees under our agreement. And that includes SeaWorld of Texas in San Antonio, and the Texas State Aquarium down in Corpus Christi. So we also collaborate, of course, with countless state, county, and city agencies and conservation organizations and other researchers. And we have a team of highly trained volunteers, some of which have been with us for decades. And they have a lot of specialized experience. So we wouldn't be able to do all of the work that we do without these people who make response, again, across such a large coastline possible. All right, so our primary headquarters is located in Galveston. We're set up to handle multiple animals for rehabilitation at a time if needed. And we also have a complete necropsy lab pictured here on the left, where we actually spend much of our time conducting a full suite of sampling on fresh dead animals. So some of the dead stranded animals with more advanced decomposition are typically recovered and sampled directly on the beach, where a lot of the state, county, and city agencies have become so important, particularly with carcass disposal. Once we've sampled an animal, that really helps with the human safety side, making sure that that's not compromised in any way once we've opened a carcass. So they're quickly buried and taken care of. Although SeaWorld of Texas is inland in San Antonio, they contribute their veterinary expertise and really experienced personnel during disentanglement and out of habitat response that we do. And that requires capture and a lot of experience from animal handlers. And they also provide that personnel and expertise during the critical phases of rehabilitations. We also work, like I said, closely with the Texas State Aquarium down here in Corpus Christi. So they have a wildlife rescue center with space for dolphin rehabilitation there as well. And that's been really helpful for live stranded animals in central and southern Texas, just so that animals can be stabilized sooner rather than having to make a trip all the way up to our main facility in Galveston to have a we also work really closely with UTRGV, the Coastal Studies Lab in South Padre, near Brownsville, and they also have space where animals can be temporarily housed for stabilization prior to transfer for rehabilitation. Again, this collaborative effort is really useful, again, trying to cover such a large coastline. So one of our primary objectives on a continuous basis is responding to marine mammal strandings. So when animals strand alive, we aim to provide care for them, which may involve bringing animals in for rehabilitation, those that are good candidates for rehab. And at times it also means making the tough decision for humane euthanasia if needed. Response also includes rescue of entangled, out of habitat, or other animals in need of medical assistance. For dead animals that wash ashore, we aim to collect data and biological samples to learn more about life history, potential contributing factors of strandings, disease. There are a number of questions we try to answer when working up those carcasses. So on average, we respond to about 135 animals per year, and the majority of those are dead. Around 10% may be live stranded. So there's a lot of opportunity to learn from the carcasses that we receive. Another primary objective is to manage a long-term database for baseline values to compare across time and space. So baseline data serves as a starting point, really, that allows us to determine how much something has changed over time or after an event, such as an oil spill. So this established database has been really important for identifying unusual mortality events in Texas, whereby the data we collect can be quantitatively compared to these long-term data. We've been in operation, like I said, since 1980, so for over 40 years. So we have a large database, and our goal is really to continue building upon that work and manage that long-term information. So over the past 8 years or so, we've also been conducting bottlenose dolphin photo identification surveys. There are a number of stranding networks that get involved in this, but not every stranding network does. So for us as an organization that responds primarily to stranded bottlenose dolphins, having a better understanding of the free-ranging populations in Texas is really important to us. We collaborated with the National Marine Fisheries Southeast Fisheries Science Center, Pascagoula Lab, it's a mouthful, to conduct PhotoID mark recapture abundance estimates for several of the Texas Bay, Sound, and estuary stocks of bottlenose dolphins in North Texas. And the TMMSN continues to conduct PhotoID surveys to contribute to that established catalog and to answer some more research questions that we're interested in that relate to occurrence, distribution, habitat use, site fidelity, the list goes on, but things that can really help inform some of our stranded animals. So we've also established a catalog for South Texas with work primarily in the lower Laguna Madre. So we're working to increase that catalog. These population studies and established catalogs are really useful for putting stranding data into context, basically for a better overall understanding of both living and dead dolphins that we respond to. So these catalogs also serve as an important baseline data, again, to compare potential changes to population dynamics, both during and after a disaster event. So our boat-based surveys also serve to document human interaction, such as harassment or entanglement, and to identify free swimming at-risk individuals that may be good candidates for early intervention that may otherwise go unreported. And finally, an overarching goal of ours is really to collaborate with other researchers with specialized expertise and to publish findings to advance science on all the data that we're collecting. This here is just a sample of recent collaborative papers we've published over the past 4 years, ranging from population abundance, behavior, and stranding trends, to novel medical procedures. So we really do work to get information out to the larger scientific community and also to engage with the public through talks and events where we set up booths. So we try to disseminate information as much as we can. We also, because we experience such a large number of strandings each year, we're also able to accommodate sample requests from various researchers. So we're currently collecting samples for quite a few researchers that have their own questions that they're trying to answer. Okay, so that's the stranding network here in a nutshell. In terms of responding to an oil spill, that will vary, of course, depending on the size and the scope of the incident and where it occurs. But essentially, responding to marine mammals is such a collaborative effort that can involve many institutions and organizations and different area researchers. So when we're first notified of a spill that has occurred in or around Texas waters, we quickly establish a plan with NOAA, and we're looped into the incident command system, essentially through a NOAA marine mammal representative for daily communication. There's a lot of communication that occurs during that time. And depending on the size of the incident, NOAA may also coordinate additional marine mammal responders to assist on the ground with response. We are a small nonprofit, and we have a lot of volunteers, but if the incident is very large, we may need support during those times. Okay, so one of our immediate goals, first off, in the event of a spill, an oil spill, is to identify and care for live stranded marine mammals that may be affected by the incident. So there are several pathways, of course, of oil exposure that can be toxic to marine mammals, and our goal is to locate and treat any living animals as quickly as possible. Annual HAZWOPER, or hazardous waste operations and emergency response. Certification is required for personnel handling potentially oiled animals, whether they are alive or dead. And during a marine spill response, we have staff that maintain certification year-round in the event of a spill. So we're ready to go. We're able to handle potentially oiled animals regardless of when that happens. So HAZWOPER certification can take quite a while. For those of you who have done that sort of certification, you know it can take many hours to get your initial certification and then to get your refresher training. So in the event of a spill, you want to move quickly. So we work really hard to stay up to date on our certifications throughout the year for that purpose. We also have staff that are trained in identifying oil exposure on stranded marine mammals. Searching for live marine mammals may involve a number of different survey types. So that may be aerial surveys conducted by TMMSN, NOAA, or other personnel. Aerial surveys are really time efficient, of course, and useful for looking for dolphins that are stranded or swimming in or near the oiled area, particularly in cases where the impacted area is either restricted or inaccessible, not easily accessible by foot or truck, or just a very large area. So where possible, land-based surveys are also conducted along the coast via ATV or truck. There may be several organizations on the ground searching for other wildlife too, so sea turtles, marine birds, that may also be affected and in need of attention. So at the TMMSN, we have marine mammal veterinarians that we work with to assess potential live stranded animals, and basically experienced handlers within our organization and designee institutions that can help collect animals. Our primary rehab center in Galveston is designed to handle multiple rehab animals at a time. And we also have the rescue center at Texas State Aquarium that can accommodate animals as needed. Okay, so another primary goal in the event of a spill is to quickly recover dead marine mammals that may be affected by the incident. So it's important that we recover these carcasses as quickly as possible. Also, just so that the tissues are viable for testing, and also to avoid potential secondary oil exposure to other animals through things like predation, scavenging. We have coyotes and birds that often scavenge on marine mammal carcasses, and so we want to collect those carcasses and handle them as quickly as possible. And also, again, for human safety, just to get those potentially oiled animals off the beach. So the aerial surveys and land-based surveys used to search for live stranded animals, of course, can also serve to locate the dead animals in the vicinity. Given the potentially large and or remote area that may need coverage, local agencies such as city park boards and county road and bridge are really instrumental in either assisting with those land-based surveys or just notifying us of stranded animals in the event that they observe them during the course of their own work. So we've worked really hard to build those relationships over the years. So stranding personnel that maintain the current HAZWOPER certification can then, once we get those reports, we can then go out and respond to the animals that they've called in about. We follow protocol established by NOAA for identifying, documenting, and sampling marine mammals that have potentially been exposed to the oil, and all data records and biological samples that we collect are maintained under a strict chain of custody. And that just helps ensure the integrity of the samples and data, as well as their admissibility in any legal proceedings that may come from the event. So we use standardized forms, again, designed by NOAA, so that our data are consistent with other organizations and stranding networks within the Northern Gulf of Mexico. And that standardization really helps when it comes to comparing across organizations. We also have veterinarians and staff that are trained in advanced sampling techniques. So when conducting necropsies, we have all of the parts, the biological samples, but also the carcasses are maintained. They're locked in freezers and they're kept in that chain of custody until the incident is formally closed. Okay, so after an incident, once waterways are unrestricted or as soon as we can gain access, boat-based PhotoID surveys may be carried out, again, depending on each case. But this allows us to not only search for free-swimming animals that may be affected, but we can collect data on, again, occurrence, distribution, behavior, and individual animal sighting records that can then be compared to data collected prior to the event. Again, we're really working to grow our PhotoID catalogs, both in the northern part of Texas and the southern regions, so that we have some baseline to compare to. So having these records is really useful to gauge if and how dolphins are using the affected habitat and if that has changed relative to the incident. Okay, so post-incident, once it's formally ended, we may move to a natural resource damage assessment step, what's called step-down sampling protocol. That step-down may still involve an elevated level of sampling beyond what we may normally collect, but we follow a protocol that will be updated over time on a case-by-case basis. Again, it's different for every event. So for example, we may take more samples from a carcass with moderate to advanced decomposition than we would typically only collect from fresh carcasses. So at this Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network, we do work really hard year-round to collect as much as possible. We do a full necropsy workup on all of our Code 2 animals, and we try to maintain a really high level of collection as possible throughout the year, again, for those comparative data. We then work with NOAA to prioritize cases for analysis, and that may be based on different things. For example, stranding locations of particular animals or animals that were visibly oiled when they came in, or based on some of the necropsy observations that may have been unusual, and so on. So there are different factors that go into prioritizing cases. We also utilize our long-term historical data, again, for those baseline comparisons to incident data. And our 40 years of collection over the years has really helped serve as a robust comparison. Okay, so the Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network has contributed to several localized natural resource damage assessments over the years. And we do that through marine mammal stranding data collection and population surveys. So Texas was not actually included in the northern Gulf of Mexico bottlenose dolphin unusual mortality event that was associated with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. You can see by this map here, the yellow shading footprint of the oil really terminates just east of the Texas-Louisiana border, and marine mammals in coastal Texas were not considered affected. Although we were not included in the UME, we were included in the NERDA process for all of the pelagic species associated with the Deepwater Horizon. There are no real borders in the ocean, and so there may have potentially been deep water animals that moved closer into Texas waters at that time. So we were included in that process for pelagic species. We were able to contribute to some of the research that came out during this time, though, and that is associated with the bottlenose dolphin UME, associated with the DWH. And we did that by supplying data collected simultaneously in Texas that were used as a reference group to compare marine mammals recovered within the impacted areas and the rest of the northern Gulf there. So papers from this contribution included a review of historical unusual mortality events. There's a demographic cluster analysis, and then a description of adrenal gland and lung disease observed in UME affected dolphins. So again, this reiterates the importance of a high standard of data collection and funding for analysis consistently year-round, even outside of disaster incidents. So again, even though Texas wasn't included in the UME, we did collect data at a high level and were able to use some of that data as reference for the impacted areas. Consistent data collection post-event is also really important. I should point out for identifying the potential long-term chronic impacts, in addition to the acute immediate effects from the oil spill. So I've kind of talked a lot about our role during an incident and how we go out and collect live animals and carcasses. But we also, it's really important that we continue that collection throughout the year following an incident, again, because not every impact is observed right away. So in summary, stranding networks serve an important role in marine mammal conservation and restoration during oil spill incidents. We do that through rescue, recovery, and of course, providing comparative baseline or reference data from established databases. A lack of baseline or reference data can limit the full understanding of the extent that a disaster event has. And enhancing stranding network capacity and PhotoID programs throughout the year will help in restoration efforts by increasing the survival of live stranded and entangled animals, by monitoring health trends over time, and by improving knowledge of wild populations and the threats they face locally. And that is my last slide. I will stop my screen share here and pass it back to Danny.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. We appreciate it.